The autumn rain pelted against the windows of St. Andrew's University as Elena Middleton hurried across the courtyard, her art history textbooks clutched tightly against her chest. She had no idea that this ordinary Tuesday morning would change everything. The 20-year-old history of art student was running late for her morning lecture, her dark hair whipping in the Scottish wind as she navigated the ancient cobblestones. Prince Alexander of Valdoria had been attending the university under the assumed name Alex Windsor for nearly 2 years. The arrangement, carefully orchestrated by the royal security team and university administrators, allowed him a taste of normal student life. At 22, he was tall and athletic, with the kind of natural charisma that drew people to him even when they didn't know his true identity. That morning, he sat in the back row of the art history lecture hall, baseball cap pulled low, trying to blend in with the other students. Elena burst through the lecture hall doors just as Professor Morrison began discussing Renaissance portraiture. Her entrance caused a minor commotion as she squeezed past other students to find an empty seat. The only available spot was next to the quiet student everyone knew as Alex Windsor. She mumbled an apology as she settled beside him, accidentally dropping her pencil case in the process. Alexander bent to retrieve the scattered pens and pencils, his fingers brushing against hers as he handed them back. For a moment their eyes met, and something passed between them that neither could quite explain. Elena felt her cheeks warm as she whispered her thanks, noting the genuine kindness in his green eyes. There was something different about him, something that set him apart from the other students, though she couldn't pinpoint what it was. As Professor Morrison droned on about the symbolic use of light in Caravaggio's paintings, Alexander found himself stealing glances at the girl beside him. Elena was taking meticulous notes, occasionally tucking a strand of hair behind her ear as she concentrated. There was an earnestness about her that he found refreshing after years of people who wanted something from him or treated him differently because of his title. After the lecture ended, Alexander lingered as Elena packed up her belongings. He had made a decision that went against every protocol he had been taught about maintaining his cover and keeping his distance from fellow students. "Would you like to grab a coffee?" he asked, his voice slightly nervous despite his royal training in public speaking. "I mean, to discuss the lecture." Professor Morrison's interpretation of chiaroscuro was interesting. Elena looked up, surprised. She had noticed Alex in several of her classes over the past months, but had never spoken to him beyond polite classroom interactions. He seemed reserved, almost guarded, but there was something compelling about his invitation. "I'd like that," she replied, then added with a small smile, "Though I have to admit, I was completely lost when he started talking about the theological implications of shadow symbolism." They walked together to the small cafe near the library, their conversation flowing easily despite Alexander's initial nervousness. Elena talked about her family, her younger sister Pippa, who was studying literature at Edinburgh, and her parents, who ran a successful party planning business. She spoke with genuine affection about her close-knit family, describing weekend visits home to Berkshire and the chaos of family dinners. Alexander found himself envious of her normal family life. He shared carefully edited versions of his own experiences, describing boarding school and the pressures of family expectations without revealing the true nature of those pressures. He told her about his gap-year travels, his time working on conservation projects in Africa, and his struggle to choose a meaningful career path. Everything he said was true, but he omitted the crucial detail that his future was predetermined by birth and constitution. As they sat in the cozy cafe, surrounded by the chatter of other students and the smell of fresh coffee, Elena began to understand why Alex seemed different. There was a formality to his speech, a careful consideration of his words that suggested he was used to being listened to carefully. His posture was impeccable, and he had an unconscious habit of scanning the room as if assessing potential threats or escape routes. Yet beneath this careful exterior, she sensed a loneliness that resonated with her own feelings of being an outsider at the prestigious university. "You're not like the other students here," Elena observed as they shared a plate of shortbread biscuits. "There's something about you that seems, I don't know, more serious maybe?" Alexander felt his chest tighten with anxiety. Had he revealed too much? Were his carefully practiced cover stories not as convincing as he thought? "I suppose my family has always emphasized the importance of responsibility," he said carefully. "They have high expectations." Elena nodded understandingly. "I get that. Sometimes I feel like I'm from a different world than most people here. My family worked hard to give me this opportunity, and I don't want to waste it." She paused, then added with characteristic honesty, "Though sometimes I wonder if I really belong here at all." Her vulnerability touched something deep within Alexander. Here was someone who understood the weight of expectations, even if she didn't know the true extent of his. "You belong here as much as anyone," he said with quiet conviction. "More than most, actually. You care about more than just the social aspects of university life." Their conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, ranging from their shared classes to their hopes for the future. Alexander was careful to keep his responses vague when Elena asked about his post-graduation plans, but he was struck by her clear sense of purpose. She wanted to work in art curation, perhaps at the National Gallery, and spoke passionately about making art accessible to everyone, not just the privileged few who could afford gallery memberships and exclusive exhibitions. As the afternoon light began to fade, Alexander realized he had been away from his security detail for longer than usual. His protection officers would be growing concerned, though they would never approach him directly unless there was immediate danger. The thought of returning to his carefully monitored existence felt suffocating after this taste of genuine connection. "I should probably head back," Elena said, gathering her things. "I have an essay on Byzantine art due tomorrow that I haven't even started." "Would you like to study together sometime?" Alexander asked, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I mean, we're in several of the same classes. It might be helpful." Elena's face lit up with a smile that made Alexander's heart skip. "I'd really like that. Though I should warn you, I'm a bit obsessive about color-coding my notes." As they parted ways outside the cafe, Alexander watched Elena walk back toward her dormitory, her figure disappearing into the gathering dusk. He felt a mixture of exhilaration and terror at what had just happened. For the first time in his life, someone had gotten to know him without knowing who he was, and he found himself desperately wanting to see her again. That evening, as Alexander sat in his private apartment, his personal protection officer briefed him on the security protocols for the following day's activities. But his mind kept wandering back to Elena's laugh, the way she bit her lip when she was thinking, and the genuine interest she had shown in his carefully edited stories. He was playing with fire, and he knew it. But for the first time in his structured, predetermined life, he felt truly alive. Meanwhile, Elena lay in her narrow dormitory bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Alex Windsor. There was definitely something mysterious about him, something that suggested his life was more complicated than he let on. But there had also been moments during their conversation when his careful facade had slipped, revealing glimpses of someone who seemed as eager for genuine connection as she was. Neither of them could have predicted that this chance encounter would set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, duty, and the price of living in the public eye. Their story was just beginning, and the world would soon be watching every moment of it unfold. The weeks following their first coffee meeting passed in a blur of stolen moments and carefully orchestrated encounters. Alexander found himself timing his movements around campus to coincide with Elena's schedule, though he was careful to make their meetings appear coincidental. His security team, led by the experienced Robert Harrison, grew increasingly concerned about the prince's deviation from established protocols, but they maintained their distance while documenting every interaction. Elena began to notice Alex's presence more frequently in her daily routine. He would appear in the library when she was researching her art history essays, always with a legitimate reason to be there, but somehow ending up at a nearby table. Their study sessions became a regular occurrence, usually in the quieter corners of the university library where they could spread out their books and talk in hushed tones about everything from medieval manuscripts to contemporary installation art. During one particularly intense study session before their midterm examinations, Elena found herself watching Alex as he concentrated on his European history textbook. The way he held himself, the unconscious authority in his gesture as he took notes, and his extensive knowledge of royal genealogies and constitutional law struck her as unusual for someone their age. When she mentioned this observation, Alexander deflected with humor, claiming he was simply a history enthusiast with an excellent memory. "You know an awful lot about the constitutional crisis of 1936, Elena said one evening as they reviewed their notes on the abdication of Edward VIII. "Most people our age barely know it happened, let alone the specific details about the Church of England's position on divorced monarchs." Alexander felt his pulse quicken. He had been sharing too much of his specialized knowledge, the kind of detailed historical understanding that came from palace tutors and constitutional experts, rather than university textbooks. "My family has always been interested in that period of history," he said carefully. "The idea of choosing love over duty. It's compelling from a historical perspective." Elena studied his face as he spoke, noting the way his expression grew more serious when he mentioned duty. There was something in his tone that suggested this wasn't merely an academic interest. "Do you think he made the right choice?" she asked softly. "Edward VIII, I mean. Giving up everything for the woman he loved?" The question hit Alexander like a physical blow. Here was the central dilemma of his own life, presented by someone who had no idea of its personal relevance to him. "I think," he said slowly, choosing his words with extreme care, "that it depends on what you believe your responsibilities are to other people. Sometimes individual happiness has to be weighed against the greater good." Their conversation was interrupted by Elena's mobile phone ringing. She glanced at the display and smiled apologetically. "It's my mom. She's been worried because I haven't called in a few days." As she answered the phone, Alexander listened to Elena's side of the conversation with fascination. The easy affection between Elena and her mother, the casual way they discussed family news and weekend plans, represented a kind of family relationship that was foreign to him. "Mum wants to know if I'm eating properly and whether I've made any nice friends," Elena said after ending the call. She looked slightly embarrassed. "She worries that I spend too much time studying and not enough time socializing." "What did you tell her?" Alexander asked, genuinely curious about how Elena would describe their relationship to her family. "I told her I'd made a good friend named Alex who helps me with my history essays," Elena replied. She immediately asked if you were boyfriend material, as she put it. "I think she's hoping I'll bring someone home for Christmas." The mention of Christmas sent a jolt of reality through Alexander. The royal family's Christmas celebrations at Sandringham were elaborate affairs planned months in advance, with every moment scheduled and every guest carefully vetted. The idea of spending a normal family Christmas, the kind Elena described with such warmth, seemed impossibly appealing and completely unattainable. As autumn progressed into winter, their relationship deepened beyond their initial academic friendship. They began spending time together outside of their studies, taking long walks through the Scottish countryside and exploring the historic town of St. Andrews. Alexander was constantly amazed by Elena's ability to find beauty and meaning in ordinary moments. She would stop to photograph interesting architectural details, engage elderly shopkeepers in conversation about local history, and express genuine delight at small discoveries like a particularly beautiful sunset over the North Sea. During one of their walks along the cliff paths overlooking the sea, Elena opened up about her own family pressures and insecurities. She talked about growing up as the middle daughter in a family where everyone seemed to know exactly what they wanted to do with their lives. Her sister Pippa was brilliant at academics and had always been destined for a career in literature or journalism. Her younger brother James was a natural entrepreneur who had been starting small businesses since he was 12 years old. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just floating," Elena confessed as they sat on a bench overlooking the waves. "Everyone else has such clear direction, and I'm still figuring out what I'm passionate about beyond looking at pretty paintings." Alexander wanted to tell her that he would give anything to have her freedom to choose her own path, but instead he focused on reassuring her about her unique strengths. "You have something that can't be taught," he said earnestly. "You see connections between things that other people miss. The way you analyze art isn't just about technique or historical context. You understand the human emotion behind it." Their first real test came during a university social event in late November, the annual St. Guard. Andrew's charity ball was one of the most significant social events of the academic year, and Elena had been uncertain about attending. The formal dress code and expensive ticket price made it feel like an event for the wealthy students whose parents could afford such luxuries without thinking twice. Alexander desperately wanted to attend the ball with Elena, but he was acutely aware of the complications it would create. Royal protection protocols for formal events were extensive, and attending such a public function would require advanced security preparations that would be difficult to explain. However, the thought of Elena attending alone, or worse, not attending at all because of financial concerns, was unacceptable to him. He solved the financial aspect by arranging for Elena to receive one of the charity's sponsored tickets, supposedly awarded through a lottery system that was actually a fiction created by his private secretary. When he asked Elena to attend the ball with him, he was touched by her genuine excitement and her immediate concern about whether her one formal dress would be appropriate for such an event. The night of the ball, Alexander saw Elena in a way that took his breath away. She wore a simple navy blue dress that she had borrowed from her sister, and she had styled her hair in an elegant updo that revealed the graceful line of her neck. But it wasn't her appearance that struck him most powerfully. It was the confidence and genuine happiness that radiated from her as she moved through the crowd of their fellow students. Elena, for her part, was struck by the transformation in Alex that evening. Gone was the casual, slightly rumpled student she had grown to know. He wore his formal attire with an unconscious elegance that spoke of years of similar events, and she noticed how other students deferred to him in subtle ways that suggested a social status she hadn't previously recognized. When they danced together for the first time, she felt the strength and confidence in his lead that came from professional instruction rather than casual learning. "You're full of surprises," Elena murmured as they swayed to the music. "Did you take ballroom dancing lessons as a child?" "Something like that," Alexander replied, his hand warm and steady on her waist. "My family believes in traditional accomplishments." As the evening progressed, Elena began to notice other details that didn't quite fit with Alex's image as an ordinary student. The way the event organizers seemed to know exactly where he was at all times. The presence of several older men in well-tailored suits who appeared to be monitoring the room rather than enjoying the party, and most tellingly, the moment when she overheard someone address Alex as "your," before being quickly cut off with a sharp look. The evening ended with Alexander walking Elena back to her dormitory, both of them reluctant to let the magical night end. As they stood outside her building, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Alexander realized that he was falling in love with her in a way that would complicate everything he had been raised to believe about his duty and his future. "Elena," he began, his voice unusually serious, "there are things about my life that are complicated. If we're going to continue seeing each other, there are things you should know." Elena looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the streetlights. "Alex, I don't know what your secret is, but I can see that you're carrying something heavy. Whatever it is, I want you to know that you can trust me." Standing there in the Scottish winter night, Alexander made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Tomorrow, he would tell Elena the truth about who he really was. Tonight, he would allow himself one last moment of being simply Alex Windsor, university student, who had fallen deeply in love with an extraordinary young woman who saw him for who he was rather than what he represented. The morning after the charity ball dawned gray and drizzly, matching the anxiety that churned in Alexander's stomach as he prepared for the most difficult conversation of his life. He had arranged to meet Elena at their usual spot in the library, but this time, he had requested that his protection officer clear the surrounding area of other students. Elena would notice the unusual privacy, but it was a necessary precaution for what he was about to reveal. Elena arrived at the library earlier than their agreed time, her mind still spinning from the previous evening's events. The more she thought about the ball, the more convinced she became that Alex was hiding something significant. The way other students had treated him with subtle deference, the mysterious men in suits who seemed to be watching him, and most tellingly, his obvious comfort with formal protocols that most university students would find intimidating. She had spent the early morning hours researching online, typing various combinations of Alex Windsor and Alexander Windsor into search engines, but finding nothing conclusive. Windsor was a common enough surname, and without additional identifying information, her searches yielded no helpful results. She had even looked through the university directory, but Alex's entry contained only basic information, with no family details or hometown listed. When Alexander arrived at the library, Elena immediately noticed the tension in his demeanor. His usual easy smile was replaced by a serious expression that made her stomach clench with apprehension. He guided her to a private study room on the upper floor, one that she had never seen available for student use before. The room was empty except for two chairs facing each other, and Elena realized that this conversation had been carefully planned. "Elena," Alexander began, his voice formal in a way that reminded her of the previous evening's glimpses of his hidden nature. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise me that you'll hear me out completely before you react." Elena felt her heart rate accelerate as she nodded her agreement. The seriousness of his tone and the careful setup of their meeting location told her that whatever Alex was about to reveal would fundamentally change their relationship. She gripped the arms of her chair and prepared herself for the worst possible scenarios her mind could conjure. "My name isn't Alex Windsor," he said quietly, his green eyes never leaving her face. "It's Prince Alexander Charles Edward of Valdoria. I'm second in line to the throne of the Kingdom of Valdoria." The words hung in the air between them like a physical barrier. Elena felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet, and for a moment, she couldn't process what she had just heard. Prince. Throne. Kingdom. The casual, slightly awkward student she had fallen for was royalty. The magnitude of the deception hit her like a wave, followed immediately by a crushing sense of her own naivety. Elena's voice came out as barely a whisper. "You're a prince." Alexander nodded, watching her face carefully for any sign of how she was processing this information. "Valdoria is a small European kingdom. My father is King Edward, and my older brother Christopher is the crown prince. I've been attending university under an assumed name because I wanted to experience something approaching a normal life before I take on full royal duties." Elena stood up abruptly and walked to the window, her back to Alexander as she tried to process what she had just learned. Everything about their relationship suddenly made sense in the most devastating way possible. The mysterious security presence, his extensive knowledge of royal history, his comfort with formal situations, and most painfully, his obvious ease with the kind of social protocols that came from a lifetime of royal training. "So, everything has been a lie," Elena said, her voice stronger now but tinged with hurt and anger. "Our entire friendship, everything we've shared, has been built on deception." "No," Alexander said urgently, standing and taking a step toward her. "Everything I've told you about myself has been true. My feelings, my thoughts, my hopes for the future. The only thing I kept from you was my title. I'm still the same person you've gotten to know." Elena turned around to face him, and Alexander was devastated to see tears gathering in her eyes. "But you're not, are you? You're not just some student struggling to figure out his future. You're a prince with predetermined responsibilities and a life that's been planned for you since birth. The Alex Windsor I thought I knew doesn't actually exist." The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to be painful. Alexander had been living a carefully constructed fiction for months, enjoying the freedom to be seen as ordinary when his life was anything but ordinary. But his feelings for Elena had been the most genuine experience of his life, and the thought of losing her because of his deception was unbearable. "I never intended for this to happen," Alexander said, his own voice breaking slightly. "I wasn't supposed to form attachments during my time at university. The original plan was to complete my degree and return to royal duties without any complications. But then I met you, and everything changed." Elena sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the implications of what she had learned. "Do you have any idea what this means for me, for my family? We're ordinary people, Alexander. My father plans parties for a living. My mother is a flight attendant. We're not the kind of people who associate with royalty." "That's exactly why I fell in love with you," Alexander said softly, kneeling beside her chair. "Because you saw me as a person rather than a title. Because you challenged me and made me think about who I am beyond my royal obligations. Because you made me feel normal for the first time in my life." The confession that he loved her sent another shock through Elena's system. She had known that their relationship was developing into something deeper than friendship, but hearing him say the words aloud, in the context of learning his true identity, felt overwhelming. How could she trust her own feelings when they were based on a version of him that wasn't complete? "I need time," Elena said finally, wiping away the tears that had begun to fall. "I need to process this and figure out what it means. I can't just pretend that finding out you're a prince doesn't change everything, because it does." Alexander felt his heart breaking, but he forced himself to respect her request. "I understand. But Elena, please remember that the person you've gotten to know over these past months is real. My title doesn't change the fact that I care about art history because you made it interesting to me, or that I look forward to our conversations more than anything else in my week." Elena gathered her belongings and headed for the door, then paused and turned back to face him. "Those men in suits last night, they were your security detail, weren't they?" Alexander nodded. "Royal Protection Service. They've been monitoring my safety since I arrived at university. They're trained to be invisible, but formal events require more obvious security protocols. So they know about me. About us. Elena's voice was flat with the realization that her private life had been under surveillance without her knowledge or consent. They know that we spend time together, yes, but they don't know about my feelings for you, and they certainly don't know that I was planning to tell you the truth. This conversation is probably going to cause a significant diplomatic incident when they report back to the palace. Elena left the library without another word, leaving Alexander alone with the wreckage of the most important relationship in his life. He remained in the study room for nearly an hour, staring out the window and trying to formulate a plan for salvaging what remained of his time at university and his connection with Elena. Over the following days, Elena threw herself into her studies with renewed intensity, using academic work as a distraction from the emotional chaos of learning Alexander's true identity. She researched the Kingdom of Valdoria thoroughly, learning about its history, political system, and the royal family that Alexander belonged to. The photographs she found of him at official royal events looked like a different person entirely from the casual student she had known. Despite being physically identical, the weight of Alexander's revelation extended far beyond the personal betrayal she felt. Elena began to understand the full scope of what a relationship with him would entail. She would be scrutinized by the international media, investigated by royal security services, and expected to navigate a world of protocols and expectations that she had no training for. Her family would be thrust into a spotlight they had never sought and might not be able to handle. Alexander, meanwhile, was dealing with the fallout from his decision to reveal his identity without consulting the palace first. His private secretary had received urgent communications from the royal household, demanding a full report on the security implications of his disclosure. His father, King Edward, had summoned him home for an emergency meeting to discuss the situation and its potential consequences. The conversation with his father took place in the king's private study, a room that represented everything Alexander had been trying to escape during his time at university. The ornate furnishings, portraits of previous monarchs, an atmosphere of weighty tradition served as a stark reminder of the responsibilities he could never fully abandon. "You've put us in an extremely difficult position, Alexander," King Edward said, his tone disappointed but not angry. "The girl will need to be thoroughly investigated by our security services. Her family background will need to be examined. If this relationship continues, she'll require extensive protocol training and media preparation. She doesn't even know if she wants the relationship to continue," Alexander replied honestly. "Learning the truth about my identity was a shock. She needs time to decide if she can accept the complications that come with being involved with someone in my position." King Edward studied his younger son carefully. Alexander had always been the more independent of his children, the one more likely to push against royal constraints. But there was something different about him now. The king recognized the look of a man who had found something worth fighting for, and he knew that forcing Alexander to abandon this relationship could have serious consequences for his future willingness to fulfill his royal duties. "If she decides to continue the relationship," the king said finally, "she'll need to understand that there can be no half measures. Dating a member of the royal family isn't a casual undertaking. It's a commitment that affects not just the two of you, but the entire institution of the monarchy." As Alexander returned to university for what might be his final weeks of normal student life, he carried with him the weight of knowing that his next conversation with Elena would determine not just the future of their relationship, but the entire trajectory of both their lives. The fairy tale romance of his university days was over. Now they would have to decide if their feelings for each other were strong enough to survive the reality of royal life. The week following Alexander's revelation passed in a haze of careful avoidance and stolen glances across lecture halls. Elena found herself hyper-aware of his presence in ways she hadn't been before, now seeing the subtle signs of his royal status that she had previously missed or dismissed, the way other students unconsciously created space around him, the discreet presence of his protection officers, and most tellingly, the change in her own feelings from comfortable familiarity to nervous uncertainty. Elena's sister Pippa arrived for an unexpected visit that weekend, claiming she needed to borrow some books for her Edinburgh coursework. But Elena suspected her mother had sent reinforcements after detecting something wrong during their recent phone conversations. Pippa had always been the more socially astute of the sisters, with an uncanny ability to read situations and people that Elena envied. "You look terrible," Pippa announced cheerfully as she settled into Elena's cramped dormitory room with takeaway coffee and pastries. And before you blame it on exam stress, I should mention that Mum is convinced something dramatic has happened with the mysterious Alex you've been mentioning. Elena felt relief at having someone to confide in, but also trepidation about how to explain the impossible situation she found herself in. What would you say if I told you that someone you cared about had been lying to you about something fundamental to their identity? She asked carefully. I'd say it depends on why they were lying and what they were lying about, Pippa replied pragmatically. Was Alex pretending to be single when he's actually married, claiming to be wealthy when he's broke, or something else entirely? Elena took a deep breath and made a decision that would draw her family into the complex web of royal protocol and media attention. Alex isn't who he said he was. His real name is Prince Alexander of Valdoria, and he's second in line to a European throne. The pastry Pippa had been eating fell from her fingers as she stared at her sister in stunned silence. You're dating a prince, she said finally, her voice flat with disbelief. An actual, real-life prince. I don't know if I'm dating him anymore, Elena replied miserably. Everything I thought I knew about him was based on a lie. How can I trust my own feelings when they were developed for someone who doesn't actually exist? Pippa processed this information with characteristic efficiency, her mind immediately jumping to the practical implications. Elena, do you realize what this means? If you continue this relationship, you could become a princess. You'd be royal. Our family would be connected to a monarchy. That's exactly the problem, Elena said, burying her face in her hands. I didn't fall in love with a prince. I fell in love with a history student who was kind and funny and made me feel special. Now I find out that person was essentially a character he was playing. But was he playing a character or was he just not mentioning his job? Pippa asked thoughtfully. I mean, his personality, his values, his feelings for you, those things were real, weren't they? The only thing he hid was his title. Elena considered this perspective, which echoed some of Alexander's own arguments, but felt different coming from her sister. His title isn't just a job, though. It's his entire life. It determines where he lives, what he does, who he associates with, even who he can marry. And now I have to decide if I want to be part of that world. Meanwhile, Alexander was dealing with his own family pressures as the palace machinery swung into action around Elena's background investigation. The process was thorough and invasive, covering everything from her family's financial history to her social media presence and academic records. Alexander found the clinical dissection of Elena's life deeply disturbing, especially since she had no knowledge that it was happening. The investigation results, when they arrived, painted a picture of exactly the kind of person Alexander had fallen in love with. Elena's family was described as hardworking, close-knit, and financially stable through their own efforts. Her academic record was excellent. Her social circle consisted of genuine friendships rather than opportunistic networking. And most importantly for the royal household, there was no evidence of any behavior or associations that would create security concerns or public relations problems. She's actually quite suitable, Alexander's private secretary reported during their weekly briefing. Her family background is middle class but respectable. She has no history of problematic relationships or controversial political opinions, and her academic achievements suggest intelligence and dedication. From a public relations perspective, she would likely be well received as a royal girlfriend. Alexander felt anger rising at the clinical way Elena's worthiness was being evaluated, as if she were being auditioned for a role rather than being recognized as the remarkable person he had fallen in love with. She's more than suitable, he said sharply. She's extraordinary. And she deserves to make this decision based on her own feelings, not based on whether she passes some royal compatibility test. The private secretary, a career palace employee named David Morrison, who had served the royal family for over 2 decades, recognized the signs of a prince who was prepared to fight for his relationship. Your Highness, perhaps it would be beneficial to arrange a meeting between Miss Middleton and some members of the royal household. She might find the reality of royal life less daunting if she had some guidance and support. Alexander rejected this suggestion immediately. Elena was already overwhelmed by the revelation of his true identity, subjecting her to royal protocol training before she had even decided whether to continue their relationship would be presumptuous and potentially counterproductive. Instead, he decided to give her space while remaining available if she wanted to talk. The breakthrough came during a chance encounter in the university bookstore, nearly 2 weeks after their library conversation. Elena was browsing the art history section when she noticed Alexander in the philosophy aisle, clearly not shopping but rather hoping to cross paths with her. The sight of him looking uncertain and almost vulnerable melted some of the defensive barriers she had built up. "Alex," she said quietly, using the name she had always known him by. "Or should I say, Your Highness?" "Please don't," Alexander said quickly. "I've always been Alex to you. I'd like to stay Alex to you, if that's possible." They found themselves walking together toward the campus coffee shop, falling into the easy rhythm of conversation that had characterized their relationship before his revelation. But now there was a new undercurrent of awareness, a recognition that every moment together was weighted with decisions about their future. "I've been thinking about what you said," Elena told him as they sat at their usual corner table, "about the person I got to know being real despite your title. And I think you're right. Mostly. But I also think you don't fully understand what you're asking of me." Alexander leaned forward intently. "Tell me, help me understand." "You've been royal your entire life," Elena explained. "You were born into this world of protocols and expectations and public scrutiny. It's natural to you even when you're trying to escape it. But for me, the idea of having every aspect of my life examined and judged by strangers is terrifying. The thought of my family being thrust into a spotlight they never sought makes me feel sick." "We could take it slowly," Alexander suggested. "There's no requirement that our relationship become public immediately. We could continue as we have been, just with honesty between us now."
Elena shook her head.
"That's not realistic, and you know it. You have protection officers who report on your activities. There are probably already files being compiled about me and my family. This isn't something we can keep quiet indefinitely." Alexander's silence confirmed her suspicions about the background investigation, and Elena felt a fresh wave of violation at the thought of her privacy being invaded without her consent. But she also saw the genuine distress in his expression and realized that he was struggling with the constraints of his position as much as she was. "There's something else," Elena continued. "I need to know that if I choose to be part of your life, it's because you want me there, not because I represent some fantasy of normalcy or rebellion against your royal duties. I won't be responsible for you making a choice you'll regret later." "Elena," Alexander said, reaching across the table to take her hand, "I fell in love with you before I fully understood what that would mean for my future. But now that I do understand, I want you to know that I would choose you over everything else. Over the crown, over my family's expectations, over everything." The intensity of his declaration both thrilled and terrified Elena. The idea that someone would be willing to give up a kingdom for her was romantic in the extreme, but it also carried a crushing weight of responsibility. "I don't want you to have to choose," she said softly. "I want to find a way for this to work that doesn't require you to abandon your responsibilities or me to lose myself in yours." Alexander felt a surge of hope at her words. The fact that Elena was thinking about ways to make their relationship work rather than simply walking away suggested that her feelings for him were strong enough to overcome the obstacles they faced. "What would that look like?" he asked. "I don't know yet," Elena admitted, "but I think it starts with us being completely honest with each other about what this relationship would require from both of us. And I think it means taking this very slowly, with you helping me understand your world, before I'm expected to become part of it." They spent the next several hours talking through the practical realities of their situation with a frankness that was both painful and necessary. Alexander explained the levels of security that would be required if their relationship became public, the media attention she could expect, and the royal protocols she would need to learn. Elena shared her fears about her family's privacy, her concerns about maintaining her own identity and career goals, and her uncertainty about whether she was strong enough for the public scrutiny that came with royal life. By the end of their conversation, they had reached a tentative agreement to continue their relationship with full knowledge of its complexities. Elena would meet with royal household staff to learn more about what would be expected of her, while Alexander would work with his family to ensure that her privacy and her family's privacy were protected as much as possible during this exploratory period. "I can't promise this will work," Elena said as they prepared to part ways. "I can't promise that I'll be able to handle everything that comes with loving a prince. But I can promise to try, because what we have together is worth the effort." Alexander kissed her forehead gently, feeling as though they had crossed a crucial threshold. "That's all I can ask for." "And Elena? Thank you for being brave enough to try." As they walked back to their respective dormitories, both Elena and Alexander knew that their relationship had fundamentally changed. They were no longer two students navigating a college romance. They were a prince and the woman he loved, attempting to build a life together across the vast divide between royal duty and personal happiness. The easy days of their courtship were over, but perhaps something deeper and more meaningful could take its place. The spring term at St. Andrews brought with it a new chapter in Elena and Alexander's relationship, one marked by careful navigation of royal protocols and the gradual integration of Elena into a world she had never imagined being part of. The palace had arranged for Elena to receive discreet coaching from Lady Margaret Thornbury, a former lady-in-waiting who specialized in preparing civilians for royal life without the formal announcement that would attract media attention. Elena's first meeting with Lady Margaret took place in a private suite at the Fairmont Hotel in St. Andrews, carefully selected for its discreet service and security arrangements. Elena arrived nervous and uncertain, wearing her best interview outfit and carrying a notebook as if she were attending a particularly important seminar. Lady Margaret, an elegant woman in her 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes, immediately put Elena at ease with her warm manner and practical approach to royal education. The most important thing to understand, Lady Margaret began over afternoon tea, is that being part of the royal family doesn't require you to stop being yourself. It does require you to learn some new skills and develop an understanding of certain expectations. But at its core, your role would be to support Alexander in his duties while maintaining your own interests and charitable work. Over the following weeks, Elena learned about everything from proper curtsying technique to the complex hierarchy of royal precedents. She studied the constitutional role of the monarchy in Valdoria, the history of Alexander's family, and the charitable causes that were traditionally supported by royal family members. Most importantly, she began to understand how she might carve out a meaningful role for herself within the constraints of royal life. I never realized how much actual work is involved in being royal, Elena confided to Alexander during one of their evening walks. Lady Margaret showed me Prince Christopher's weekly schedule, and he has more commitments than most government ministers. Alexander appreciated Elena's growing understanding of the realities of his future life. It's not just ribbon cutting and state dinners, he agreed, though there's certainly some of that too. The charitable work is the most fulfilling part, I think. When you can use your position to genuinely help people or bring attention to important causes, it makes all the protocol worth it. As Elena's education in royal life progressed, Alexander was dealing with his own preparations for their eventual public debut as a couple. The palace communications team had developed a comprehensive media strategy designed to control the narrative around their relationship from the beginning. Photographers would be given limited access at carefully planned events. Elena would be gradually introduced to royal circles through small private gatherings, and her family would receive security briefings to prepare them for the inevitable media attention. The first test of these preparations came during the Easter break, when Elena was invited to join Alexander at Balmoral Castle for a small family gathering. The invitation represented a significant step in their relationship, as it would be Elena's first time meeting King Edward and Queen Isabella in person. Alexander's older brother Christopher would also be present with his wife, Princess Sophie, providing Elena with an opportunity to observe an established royal marriage in action. Elena spent considerable time preparing for the visit, working with Lady Margaret on appropriate attire, conversation topics that would be suitable for royal dinner table discussion, and the complex etiquette surrounding meals and social interactions at a royal residence. Despite this preparation, she felt overwhelming anxiety as their car approached the imposing gates of Balmoral. "Remember," Alexander said, taking her hand as they drove up the long driveway, "they're going to love you because I love you. My father may seem formal at first, but he has a wonderful sense of humor once he relaxes. My mother is genuinely warm and interested in people. And Christopher and Sophie are probably the most normal royal couple you'll ever meet." King Edward and Queen Isabella received Elena in the castle's drawing room with gracious formality that gradually warmed into genuine interest as the conversation progressed. Elena found herself discussing art history with Queen Isabella, who had studied the subject before her marriage and maintained a lifelong interest in museum curation. King Edward questioned her thoughtfully about her career aspirations and her views on the role of art in public education. The most revealing moment came during dinner, when Princess Sophie shared stories about her own transition into royal life. I was a solicitor before I married Christopher, she told Elena. I thought I understood what I was getting into, but nothing really prepares you for the reality of having every outfit choice analyzed by fashion journalists, or learning that casual comments at charity events can become international headlines. How do you handle it? Elena asked, genuinely curious about the practical aspects of managing public scrutiny. You learn to separate your public role from your private self, Sophie replied, and you surround yourself with people who knew you before you became royal, who can remind you of who you are when the protocol and formality become overwhelming. Most importantly, you remember that the work you're able to do because of your position makes all the challenges worthwhile. Alexander watched Elena navigate these conversations with growing pride and relief. She was holding her own admirably with his family, asking intelligent questions and sharing her own thoughts without being intimidated by their royal status. His parents, he could see, were impressed by her genuine interest in their work and her thoughtful approach to the complexities of royal life. The weekend concluded with King Edward requesting a private conversation with Elena, a meeting that she approached with considerable trepidation. They met in his study, the same room where Alexander had discussed the relationship with his father months earlier. King Edward's manner was serious but not unkind as he addressed the future of Elena's relationship with his son. Elena, I want you to know that my wife and I are very impressed with you, the king began. You clearly cared deeply for Alexander, and it's equally clear that you've given serious thought to what a life with him would entail. I appreciate that you're not entering into this relationship lightly. Thank you, Your Majesty, Elena replied, grateful that her voice remained steady despite her nervousness. I also want you to understand, King Edward continued, that if you and Alexander decide to marry eventually, you would be taking on responsibilities that extend far beyond your personal relationship. You would become a representative of our country and our monarchy. That's a significant burden to place on anyone, and I want to ensure that you're prepared for it. Elena took a deep breath before responding. I won't pretend that the prospect isn't daunting, Your Majesty, but I've come to understand that the work your family does is genuinely important. If I can contribute to that work while supporting Alexander, then I think I could find meaning and purpose in royal life. King Edward smiled for the first time during their conversation. That's exactly the right answer, my dear. Welcome to the family. The drive back to St. Andrews was filled with a mixture of relief and excitement as Elena processed the weekend's events. Alexander was thrilled by his family's obvious approval of Elena, but he was also aware that their public debut as a couple would bring new challenges that would test their relationship in ways that private family dinners could not. Are you ready for the next phase? Alexander asked as they approached the university. Once we go public, there's no going back to anonymity. Elena considered the question seriously. Over the past months, she had watched Alexander balance his royal responsibilities with his desire for personal happiness, and she had seen the genuine good that the royal family was able to accomplish through their charitable work and public service. She had also come to understand that her relationship with Alexander was strong enough to withstand the pressures of public scrutiny, provided they continued to support each other through the challenges ahead. I think I am, Elena said finally. I know it won't be easy, but what we have together is worth fighting for, and I think I could do good work as part of your family. Alexander kissed her hand, overwhelmed with gratitude for her courage and her commitment to their future together. I love you, Elena Middleton, and I can't wait to share that love with the world. 3 months later, as Elena stood beside Alexander on the steps of the National Gallery at their first official public engagement, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The young woman who had rushed into an art history lecture 18 months earlier could never have imagined that she would one day be addressed as Your Royal Highness, or that her quiet romance with a fellow student would become a fairy tale that captured the world's imagination. But as she watched Alexander speak passionately about the importance of arts education to a crowd of journalists and art enthusiasts, Elena knew that she had made the right choice. Their love story had evolved from a university romance into something far more complex and meaningful, a partnership that would allow them to serve others while building a life together that honored both duty and happiness. The photographer's cameras flashed as Alexander took Elena's hand, officially presenting her to the world as his future bride. The shy history student and the prince who had sought normalcy had found something neither had expected, a love strong enough to bridge two worlds and create something entirely new. Their fairy tale was just beginning, but it was grounded in the reality of shared values, mutual respect, and a deep commitment to using their privileged position to make a positive difference in the world. As they walked into the gallery together, Elena caught sight of their reflection in the glass doors, a prince and his princess-to-be, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, with the confidence that came from knowing they belonged together. The unseen moments of their courtship had prepared them well for the very public life that awaited them, and their love story would continue to unfold under the watchful eyes of a world that believed, once again, in the power of true love to conquer all obstacles.